Hello, Maryland. Hello, America. I want real quickly to ask about 10 young people of different races, colors, creeds, and sexuality to make their way and come stand on the stage with me. About 10 young people. I believe that we should, real quickly, right down here at 3. Come on up if you want to. Come on. Come on. Testing. Come on close. Come on in. Come on, Jamie. I'm here today because I took a vow to follow this brown-skinned Palestinian Jew named Jesus, who stood up in the public square of his own day and said enough to violence. And I'm here to challenge the church and religious communities to be involved, and especially those who engage in the theological malpractice of saying that the only moral issues are being against gay people and against abortion and for prayer in the school and for tax reform and for gun rights. I want to ask them, why do you say so much about what God says so little and so little about what God says so much? And how are you so quiet now when our children are dying? My tradition teaches me to always trust the young people who have the courage to stand up and say enough. In ancient Israel, it was a teenager, David, who stood against the tyranny and the violence and the bullying of a loudmouth Goliath. In my tradition, it was in Jesus' day that a young boy shared his lunch with 5,000 people and by some miracle had more than enough to feed everybody with leftovers. In the great tradition of the prophet Isaiah, the text says that in the peaceable kingdom, the kingdom that God wants, the lion will lay down with the lamb, and they shall be led by a child. Yeah. And so I stopped by to tell you that young folk have always been called to lead us toward a more perfect union. Yeah. This is not new. Barber was a student like you when she led a walk out of her school in Virginia to protest segregation and started the movement that led to the Brown versus Board of Education decision. It was a young teenage Frederick Douglass who decided he would not take slavery anymore right here in Maryland, who broke away from slavery and became a leading abolitionist. When the civil rights movement had lost its energy after the victory in Montgomery, it was black and white students that came together that started the sit-in movement and the freedom rides, and then in Raleigh, North Carolina, formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that changed America. When the local movement in Birmingham, Alabama was at an impasse, and even Dr. King going to jail on Easter weekend could not shake Bull Connor, his iron grip on the city, it was children that walked out of school and began to lead this nation in a new direction. A little child shall lead them. The prophet declares it. History attests that it's true. And so we're here today to simply acknowledge, bless, and join your leadership, because you stand in a great tradition of young people who have helped transform this nation. But if we as people are allowed to follow you toward the country we've never yet been, we must be clear about this crisis we face. And despite your clear and collective cry of never again, even in the state of Florida, they proposed to fight violence with violence and pass legislation that would authorize teachers to carry guns in school. That is not the right way. Jesus told us that those who live by the sword will die by the sword. No good can come from militarizing our teachers in classrooms. There have already been instances of guns accidentally going off in classrooms. And yet many politicians think that instead of creating stronger background checks and banning assault rifles, that arming our teachers is the best way to prevent another tragedy. And sad to say, the same ones that vote to arm our teachers with guns then cut money for public education and disarm our teachers from being able to train their children. Clearly, many lawmakers are bought and paid for by the NRA, and they are choosing to prioritize their own ambition and wealth over the well-being of our children, our families, and individuals. No one in this nation needs an assault rifle to protect themselves. Nor do they need an assault rifle to hunt. And yet many of our elected representatives refuse to remove assault weapons from the streets because their campaigns are funded by the very companies that profit from making and the selling of their guns. And so every time you continue to support assault weapons because you've been paid off, you are taking blood money, and we ought to call it what it is. Politicians say they don't trust young people under the age of 21 to consume alcohol, but they trust them with an assault rifle. Now the solutions we need are common sense. They are simple. They are wanted by a majority of the people across this country, and yet a majority of politicians refuse to do anything about it. The Constitution, Jamie, you're a constitutional lawyer, guarantees us the right to life, liberty, and locomotion. That's why any policy that endangers my life, my liberty, and my locomotion, my ability to go where I want to go and be free, is unconstitutional. We have seen 30 mass shootings already in 2018, more than the rest of the world has experienced in decades. And whether it's in Parkland or Chicago, whether it's in Sandy Hook or Charlotte, it's wrong, it's unconscionable, it's immoral. Less than every 10 hours of every day, another young person dies from gun violence. Every 10 hours. And that number is higher for minority students. Now, why do lawmakers who refuse to listen to the voices of the American people continue to sit in the seats of power? It is the influence of gun money through the groups like the NRA. That's part of the story. But money alone is not enough. You see, these politicians stay in, and you have to know this if you're going to have a movement. They stay in power, not just because of the NRA, but the same politicians that are against banning assault weapons also pass voter suppression laws. And those laws don't just hurt black people, they hurt the democracy. They accept money from the NRA, and then they turn around and close down polling places and limit early voting and gerrymander districts so that they continue to accept the money, but then they create a political hacking of our system long before Russia did anything. We have less voting rights today than we had August 6, 1965, since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act June 25, 2013, and the Congress under Boehner, McConnell, and Ryan has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act for over 1,000 days. Put that in context. Strom Thurmond only refused the Civil Rights Act of 1957 for 24 hours. This leadership has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act for over 1,000 days. And every day we have less voting rights and more voter suppression. We elect more politicians that protect guns. Not only that, we must understand that there is a wealthy oligarchy that works to subvert the democracy and works to pit Americans against one another. America's original sin of racism threatens all in this present crisis. And we must be clear, if the house is on fire, no one can just save their room. So this fight to assault, you have to connect the dots. Republicans should have to decide they're not going to be bought by the NRA. And Democrats are going to have to decide if you ever again get the presidency and the House and the Senate, you won't be scared of the NRA and do what needs to be done. As I close, you see, violence is an American problem. It's not a recent problem. Violence has tainted the heart of our democracy far too long. In fact, the Second Amendment itself was crafted not for people to protect themselves against a foreign power, But the Second Amendment was crafted to equip slave patrols and to allow slave masters to have guns in order to prevent uprising and to kill slaves and retrieve runaway slaves. The state of Virginia forced that provision in the Constitution and refused to ratify the Constitution until it was there. So the beginnings of the Second Amendment was put in the law to give slave masters the ability to kill black folk, but now it's killing all of us, and that's why we have to change. Notice the Second Amendment does not guarantee the right to bear arms. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. And the militia then meant slave patrols. And that is why we must fight now. The rate of gun violence in the top 10 states with the weakest gun laws are over 3 times higher than the states with the strongest gun laws. Right now, we in this country, the military only has about 8 million guns and weapons, and civilians have over 300 million. Politicians constantly want to throw the blame of gun violence onto guns, gangs, and mental health. But we must say to them, the real reality is guns are the problem. And anytime you protect guns more than you protect children, we have a problem in this nation. And it doesn't matter if they're white, if they're black, if they're Latino, if they're red, if they're yellow, if they're rich, if they're poor, if they're young, if they're old, if they're urban, if they're rural. If you do not protect our children, then you are engaging in an immoral political lifestyle. How many of our children have to be murdered in their classroom before Congress decides enough is enough? How many people have to be gunned down while their heads are bent as they pray in their churches? How many innocent bystanders have to be killed at a concert or a club while our leaders sit idly by? It's gone on too long. But not only that, Jamie, we have to realize that in this time, the politicians are not just wrong on this issue. There are other issues that are connected to death. Coretta Scott King once said that violence wasn't just killing somebody with a gun like her husband was killed. She said violence is neglecting school children. Violence is punishing a mother and her family. Violence for no reason. Violence is discrimination against working people and not paying them a living wage. Violence is ghetto housing. Violence is ignoring medical needs. Violence is a contempt for poverty. It's not having a contempt for poverty. And violence is an apathetic attitude that doesn't try to stand up against violence. That's what Coretta said. So the same politicians that are blocking the assault weapons being banned are the same ones blocking affordable health care. And if you're concerned about the death from guns, as ugly and as horrific as it is, for every 500,000 people that don't get health care, 2,800 die. There are 37 million people out health care. That means over 200,000 people will die this year, not because God called them home, but because of the lack of health care. They blocked voting rights, and people died for voting rights, white and black. The Mailman's School of Public Policy in New York says that 250,000 people die every year from low wages and low wealth. They protect corporations when people can buy unleaded gas, but they can't buy unleaded water. And so, my brothers and sisters, this movement is really about taking on the culture of violence. You can't disconnect that the same people that stop health care are the same people that vote against banning guns, and the same people that block money for public education are often the same people that block stopping guns, and the same people that are against the LGBT community, and the same people that are against the immigrant community and refuse to have just immigration are the same people that vote not to ban assault weapons. Well, if they are cynical enough to be together, we ought to be smart enough to come together. And so we say enough. Enough with the policies of violence. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, is linking up with youth across this country to say enough. No more apathy. Enough. No more hate, enough. No more silence, enough. No more accepting things as they are, enough. No more protecting guns and not protecting children, enough. No more being scared, enough. No more not voting, enough. No more. We will vote, we will march, and if they don't hear the march today, then let's tell the students, I want y'all to tell them, tell the students if they don't hear the march today, then let's have nonviolent sit-ins in every state legislature and in the Congress. Let's join the march today and then join the fight every day after. And let's make sure that they know this is not a moment, this is a movement. We will not remain quiet. We will rise up. We will cry out for justice. If you're tired of seeing death and violence, then it's time for us to say enough. Young and old, enough. Black and white, enough. Red and yellow, enough. 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 Enough.